Good day. We will be looking at word problems in percentages. So I have an example that I've written down. Later on, I will do a different example where I explain it in full detail and do the calculations with you on video. Now, this particular word problem reads, Ali had 120 rand. He spent 40% of the money on a watch and 25% of the remainder on a pen. Now, the ones that I've underlined are our keywords or our prompts on how to calculate this word problem. Now, the first question says, what percentage of his money did he spend on the pen? The first thing that we want to know here is the percentage. So what I've done is I've written down keywords from the question to help us break down what they're asking us and how to then calculate it. So the word remainder tells us the leftover. And they want to know of the leftover money that he had, 25% of that leftover was spent on a pen. Then the word of tells us we are going to multiply. Now, before I can begin doing this, I first need to know what is the leftover percentage. So they told me that 40% was spent on a watch. So I need to then take this 40% out of my calculation so I know exactly what percentage was left over in the end. So I then say 100% minus 40%, that leaves me with 60% as the remainder. So I've written here, this is the remainder. Now, it says here 25% of the remainder on a pen. Now, 25% from the 60% was spent on a pen. The two words telling me here again is remainder and of. So we found the remainder percentage or the remaining percentage, which is 60%. And the word of tells me that I need to multiply 25% by my 60%. So as you can see, I've written 25% of 60% was spent on a pen. Now, because that word of is there, immediately tells me that I need to multiply. So my first step is to convert each of my percentages into fractions. Remember, when you are converting percentages into fractions, you take away the percent sign and make the denominator 100 as it is indicated here. Then we will be multiplying, so we have our multiplication sign to show that we're multiplying fraction by fraction. The next step is to simplify. This one is a little bit more detailed. So what we're going to do here, I have chosen to use cross simplification. If you want to do straight multiplication, that just means you will say 25 times 60 and 100 times 100 and then go straight into division. But what I've chosen to do is I want to work with smaller numbers, and for me to work with smaller numbers, I am going to first look for my HCF and then I will straight multiply. Now, when you do that, when you're going to look for your HCF, it is the number or the greatest number or the highest number that can go into both of the opposite numbers. Remember, we're looking at the opposite numbers and not the numbers directly across from each other. So the one diagonal from each other. 160. So 60 is diagonal to 100. I want to know what is my highest common factor between these two numbers. So you'll ask yourself the question, you'll go through the process. Remember, if you cannot find the highest number, you can use a common factor. It just means at the end that you'll have bigger numbers than what I have here. So you'll ask yourself, can 2 go into them? Can 5 go? Can 10 go? Can 15 go? Can 20 go? And if you're not sure, look at your two common factors that you'd like to choose and then write down their multiples on the side of your page. Now, the highest common factor between 160 is 20. So I will divide 100 by 20 and I will divide 60 by 20. On the other side, with 25 and 100, I can also look for my highest common factor, my HCF. The highest common factor between 25 and 100 is 25. So again, I will divide 25 by 25 and 100 by 25 here. So 25 divided by 25 gives me 1, and 100 divided by 20 gives me 5. 60 divided by 20 gives me 3, and 100 divided by 25 gives me 4. Now, in this next step, I will then do straight multiplication. So, I will say 1 times 3 and 5 times 4. When I say that, I will then have, so that leaves me then with 3 divided by 20. Once we get to this point, we do need to do division. You again will choose whether you will use short division or long division. I do prefer, as I've previously stated, long division because it makes it much easier for me to track if I've done something wrong. Now, the bottom number goes on the outside and the top number goes on the inside. You will notice that I've done something a bit different here. I have 3 there, but here I have 3.00. The reason I've done so is you can see that 20 is much larger than the number that is being divided. So because 3 is much smaller than 20, I have to add a decimal point and 2 zeros. You will decide if you are going to add 1 zero or if you will add 2 zeros. It's always safer to go with 2 zeros and not only 1 zero. There are cases where you will only need 1 zero and not 2 zeros. So let's get straight into the division. 20 cannot go into 3, so I put my 0 down. I raise my decimal point up high. Now I look at these two digits together, 0 and 3, so that gives me 30. 20 goes into 30 once. 1 times 20 gives me 20, and I have a remainder of 10. The 0 comes down because 20 cannot go into 10, so my next 0 comes down and that leaves me with 100. 20 goes into 100 5 times, and 5 times 20 is 100, leaving no remainders. Now remember, this 0.15 is not a percentage. The reason it is not a percentage is because in the very beginning we changed our percentages into fractions. So my question wanted me to give an answer in a percentage form. Now because I started by changing these two numbers into a fraction, that means at the end I will multiply by 100 to make it a percentage again. So I multiply by 100, 2 zeros means I'm moving my decimal point back 2 places, and it ends up with 15%. Now the second part of this question reads, how much money did he have left after buying the watch and the pen? So we first need to know what percentage was spent. So I'm going to put a side note. First, find what percentage was spent. Now that means I'm going to say initially I had 40% being spent on the watch and 15% being spent on the pen, which we calculated in the first part of the question. Now for me to find out the total of how much percent was spent, I will then say 40% plus 15% gives me 55% spent. They want to know how much money has left over. So I need to know what is the percentage left over. So for us to find that, I will note down again, find leftover percentage. That requires me to find out of 100, how much is left? So I will say 100% minus 55% gives me 45%. If you are not sure, you will do long subtraction and then do your borrowing thereafter. So I have 45% left over. And they said in the initial part of the question that he had 120 rand. That means I will multiply my 45% by 120. Again, whenever we have a percentage, we want to convert this percentage into a fraction. So we have 45, we take away the percent sign and we put the denominator of 100. 120 will also go over 1 because we want to have fraction multiplying by fraction. At this point, you can decide if you are going to do straight multiplication or if you are going to cross simplify first. It is completely up to you. I do prefer cross simplification because then that means I do have smaller numbers that I need to work with. When we look for the highest common factor between 120 and 100, you have to do the check. You will ask yourself, can 2 go into both of them? Can 3 go into them? Can 5 go into them? Can 10 go into them? So I'm going to end up using 20. I will divide, that's 25. I will divide both of my diagonal numbers by 20. This leaves me with 6 over 1 times 45 over 5. Remember, we cannot look for the highest common factor between 1 and 45 because our highest common factor cannot be greater than the smallest number that we have. So 1 is the highest common factor between 1 and 45, and that means 45 stays the same. So there's no need for us to say 1 divided by 1 and 45 divided by 1. Now we go into straight multiplication. You are not just going to know right off the top of your head what is 6 times 45. So on the side of your page, you will do your multiplication or you'll do your sum on the side. 6 5s are 30, 6 4s are 6 12, 18 24, plus 3 is 27. That gives me 270 over 5. In the final stage, we are going to simplify by division. Remember, the bottom number goes on the outside and the top number goes on the inside. 5 cannot go into 2, so we put our dot at the top. 5 goes into 27 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25. With the remainder of 2, I bring down my 0 and 5 goes into 24 times with no remainder left over. That means that my answer is 54 rand.